the issue of the papacy. So perhaps a lot of people would have thought that I would put this as the top issue. In a lot of ways, just maybe from outsider perspective or something like that, it could appear that that's the most obvious difference, right? The Orthodox Church does not believe that the Bishop of Rome possesses a unique charism and power of supremacy, universality, and infallibility and indefectibility. The Orthodox Church believes that any bishopric and any patriarchate, a highly revered, for example, bishopric, which is a patriarchate, which the councils have kind of accorded certain canonical privileges, for example, to bishoprics to make them patriarchates. We don't believe that any of those, by virtue of those privileges or by virtue of necessarily even being an apostolic see, protects them necessarily from the possibility of error or defecting. Or being in any unique way as an individual bishopric infallible. And so obviously the Vatican I definition of infallibility is unacceptable in Orthodoxy, and we would just simply say the fact that that's defined so late in the game in the 1800s shows that it's obviously not the universal doctrine of the first 1,000 years, right? I mean, wouldn't this have been in the Creed? Right? Wouldn't this have been the first thing that was defined in the first ecumenical councils? Wouldn't we have had the clear explication and definition of papal infallibility and indefectibility and supremacy if that was always universally understood to be the case? In fact, that's what Vatican I says about the papacy, right? It says that it was always universally and easily understood to be the case that the Roman See was universal in its jurisdiction, power, supremacy, and infallibility and indefectibility, right? And that this was conferred directly by Peter. I think that there's a lot of Roman Catholics nowadays that are quite obviously questioning that thesis of Vatican I, given what we've seen, especially in the last few years. So yes, the papacy does figure prominently there. The Orthodox view, our take on the papacy, you could say, is that in the early church, yes, there was a primacy that Rome possessed. And if you read somebody like St. Irenaeus in his famous Against Heresies, he actually lists why. Right? This is a famously quoted section from Against Heresies by Roman Catholics, where they will talk about the fact that Irenaeus, very early on in the game, 180 or so AD, mentions this primacy. And the interesting thing about this primacy is that it doesn't say anything about Petrine power or indefectibility in the sense of a perfect charism or a special charism, right? And there's nothing like that. It's said to be a doubly apostolic see, which is because of Peter and Paul. And so, yes, there is an apostolic power and primacy, you could say, that's there because it was Petrine and it was also Pauline. That's Irenaeus's argumentation. But there's no mention in Irenaeus there of anything about infallibility or a special charism, a special gift given to Peter given to his successors by Peter. And just keep in mind, of course, that other sees like Antioch, right, were also established by Peter. So it's a real weird sort of mental gymnastics that goes on where they try to explain how, well, no, Antioch, even though it was established by Peter, has no special charism. Peter, for whatever reason, only passed that special charism to Rome. And then you say, on what basis? We don't know. Oh, because he died there. Really? You see, the argumentation doesn't explain why any bishopric like Antioch, which everyone knows Peter also established the bishopric at Antioch, which is Orthodox, like why Rome would somehow get this special magical charism of infallibility and indefectibility. So they actually shoot themselves in the foot when they argue that the Petrine succession has inerrancy, indefectibility, and infallibility because Peter established Antioch, right? And you can find all the way up into Pope St. Gregory the Great, where even Pope Gregory, very late in the game, is admitting that the Peter see, the Petrine office or see, is at least three, right? It's Rome, Alexandria, and Antioch. Those are all Peter, right? But where in any of this do we get the Vatican I special place for Rome alone? So Orthodoxy sees the canonical privileges and the honor that was given to Rome as doubly apostolic evolving over many centuries to be papal infallibility. And so, yes, there is a place for Rome, just as Peter had a place amongst the apostles, but there's no special place of infallibility and indefectibility on the part of Rome. And in fact, many instances show that Rome has defected, right? At the time of ecumenical councils, where Pope Honorius is condemned, and then later ecumenical councils reaffirmed the condemnation of Honorius, the Sixth Council, and later the Seventh Council. And you get later instances of glaring papal mistakes, especially the difference between Vatican I and Vatican II, very glaring mistakes and contradictions between those councils. And in fact, today's modus operandi of everything that's going on with all the scandals and controversy of Francis also demonstrate that to be the case, that Pope Francis obviously does not possess any special charism of indefectibility from Peter or the Holy Spirit. So I would say that the papacy does rank very high, but the papacy ranks high for different reasons than most people would say, and that's because my number 2 would be the cosmic scope of Christ's redemption. Now, a lot of people aren't really familiar with this, and they overlook this because they don't think that the cosmic scope is that really important, or what are you talking about? And lost. Now, when it comes to the first and foremost big difference, it is the doctrine of the Filioque, right? This is the addition to the creed, which occurred over many centuries in the West. It took the West many centuries to really explain in what sense and why they have the addition to the creed. But it's the theological issue that is the main problem. And it's a theological issue because between 1054 and 1274 with the Council of Lyons, it really becomes clear what the Latin Church means by the term. And they make it very clear that they do mean that the Father and the Son together form a hypostatic origin of the Spirit. What that means is just simply to say that for the East, there's a clear way to distinguish the persons in the Trinity. And for us, that's called hypostatic properties. And as we said in the other video on the councils, the Cappadocians, their theology is confirmed at Constantinople I, right? This ecumenical council that follows Nicaea explicitly lays down in what sense we understand the Father to be the cause. And all of those Cappadocians are explicit that it's the Father as the sole cause, right? They're unambiguous on this question. If you read Soshinsky's book on the Filioque, the modern academic treatment from a uniate at the time, Soshinsky is very clear that the Cappadocians absolutely believe that the Father alone is the cause of the Son and the Spirit. Therefore, there's no secondary causal role. There's no additional causal role that the Son participates in or shares in with the Father of the Spirit's personal origin. And so once you do have this introduction of the shared causal role, you get an imbalance, right? You get this dyad. And then we will get people like St. Photius the Great calling this out, calling it a dyad, explaining it to be heretical. You'll get St. Gregory Palamas doing an entire treatise, basically restating St. Photius. The treatise is called the Apodictic Treatise on the Holy Spirit. And it shows the logical inconsistencies and heresies of granting to the Son the causal role of the Father, right? So if you do this, you can see how the Roman Catholic Church would then get into confusing who the Spirit is, confusing the Spirit with attributes or energies like love, saying the Spirit is love, or saying that the Spirit proceeds from the will of the Godhead. These kinds of mistakes that ironically were already condemned as Arian mistakes about the Son, right? To say that the Son proceeded by the will of the Father would make the Son a work, right? And that would be to subordinate the Son and to make the Son lesser than the Father and not of the Father's nature. Well, so likewise, in the same way, as the Roman Catholic Church says, right? It says that the Spirit proceeds by will. You cannot say that the Spirit is a product of will, because that would make him a work and make him subordinate. And the only reason that this occurs in the Roman Catholic Church is the original confusion between nature and person. And that confusion between nature and person in Roman Catholic theology, their confusion on the doctrine of simplicity and absolute divine simplicity, is what led to Filioque and what led to all of the other mistakes in Christology, including the loss of the cosmic scope of Christ's incarnation, and as well as the many other mistakes all the way into the error of the beatific vision, which Orthodoxy does not accept either.